Welcome to the Markets Club podcast. This podcast is about the commodities markets and uncertainty with the New World screwworm outbreak in South Texas. I am joining with John Heinburg from Total Farm Marketing and Charlie Martinez from the University of Tennessee about the cattle markets with the New World screwworm in Texas. Now he's joining with me is John Heinberg from Total Farm Marketing. Hey John, how are things with the markets?
Well, obviously the markets are not in great shape with the way we've been selling off the grains here the last couple of weeks now, as we've kind of taken a lot of the bullish news out of the marketplace in that regard. So, again, it's just a difficult time right now, and seasonality is also a big play in this market right at this time frame.
John, it's been crazy in the grains markets and the livestock markets with the news in Texas for the New World's worm outbreak from last week. Well, you're having a good knowledge of the corn markets with the fundamentals on the corn markets. What's up with that about corn prices are falling apart from last week?
Yeah, let's just touch base on what's going on here. I mentioned it briefly in the previous question. Just we're running out of bullish news, and then throw on top of that, weather is not a concern here at this time frame. I know we're getting a lot of rain in some areas, and that does have some concerns to it. But again, in the bigger picture, for every guy that's got water issues, there's 30 guys that are happy. Remember, it was just a couple of years ago we lost over a couple 100,000 acres in South Dakota due to flooding, and we still popped up a near record or record crop. So again, it's early, and obviously I feel for guys in those situations with these storms that are coming through. This market's being driven by a lot more than that too here in terms of this downside move. Some of it is just the competition that's out there globally for corn at this time frame. This is the second year in a row. We basically saw about the first part of May that we kind of put a bit of a recovery high, or in this case, it was a high in, and then we just saw the market really roll over. And I think a lot of that is more tied to what's going on with South American bushels. USDA report today, the biggest move in that report was the raising of the Argentina crop up, raising the Brazilian crop up. They added 9 million metric tons to the global balance sheet. Now, that really actually got the USDA kind of in line with where the rest of the world thinks those crops are, but it's still just not a positive look. And we continue to see old crop corn struggle. Yeah, export demand is strong, but right now there's just a lot of corn in South America that's available to the market at a cheap price.
What do you think that the corn markets is getting ramp up from the cattle markets for August?
Right now they're trading very independently from each other. And like the fact that even on the side of things now that wheat prices come down, does that slide into some feed usage again on the corn side of it too? Summer markets, cattle typically has a very bullish seasonal starting here about mid-June. Owners of August cattle, live cattle typically see some pretty good returns. The biggest thing we're going to be focused on there is the basis, the difference between futures and cash. Typically, that August contract likes to tighten up that basis, which is very wide right now. And I don't see the cash market coming down. So it's probably going to be tied to the August on the increase. Now, on the corn side, it's all going to be about weather. We got the acre number coming at the end of the month. We'll see what happens with that. We're going to be down corn acres from last year, but is it up more a little bit from where we were in March? We'll have to see. Same thing with the soybean side as well. And then after we get through that report on the 30th of June, it's all going to be about weather and where we are there. The most important time, obviously, for corn development is pollination. Do we have some moisture in the air in that time frame? And then finishing this crop out as we get into August and September, again, are very, very key times times in terms of weather on that corn crop. So those things are going to be the two biggest things driving this market going forward, with the exception of outlier things that we don't see coming. Again, we can't control government policy and we can't control news headlines, things of that nature. But at least if everything stays status quo there, you're looking at markets are going to be focused on those types of factors going into the summer months.
What is your position on the technicals buying in the beans markets for next few weeks?
Again, next few weeks, beans are very weak on the technical picture. We'll see what happens if we break through that July contract or even November down to that 1090 window. That'll be a spot that we could see some bounce if it wants to. A little fearful though. The funds are still very, very long soybeans, and if they got some reason to push it out and go flat, kind of like they did in corn. Corn really has lost most of its length from the funds. They got a reason they can push it out and build a short position. They're going to do that, and that's going to push us right through those barriers. And we got some downside targets that are very challenging coming in front of us if that were to happen. So I think the biggest key there is just going to be what happens on the demand side. Does China come into the market? Because right now, bushels for bushels, we still got some work to do going to the downside here, and the charts still reflect that with a weak technical picture, especially with the price movements kicking in this afternoon.
How about the technical aspects on the wheat markets on spring wheat and Chicago wheat?
Yeah, the wheat markets like corn has had a heck of a push lower. Now we got USDA numbers today, obviously tightened up some production. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. We got a little bit of a consolidation pattern.
We talked with John Heinburg from Total Farm Marketing on the corn markets. What's happening in Texas for the feed demand from the corn markets? Now that we can talk about what the news on the Nooster worm outbreak in South Texas. He is joining us as Charlie Martinez from the University of Tennessee. Charlie is a livestock specialist and livestock economist for the University of Tennessee. Charlie, how are you today with the New World Worm in South Texas? Of course you're from.
Yeah, well, I'm on the total opposite end of South Texas right now. I'm actually in Indiana for the day for a cattle show with my family. But back home, we were already, kind of prepared for New World Screwworm, and my family, they kind of had protocols ready to roll. Um, we know that if the protocol is put into place and people follow the protocol, it seems like the quarantine and kind of just keeping the animal secluded and also under observation, it works. The question is going to become, in my opinion, outside of the cattle side of things, it's going to be more the wildlife and what is the impact of wildlife, and does it help spread the fly, and if so, how fast can we combat it? It's kind of unfortunate that it's happening in the middle of summer. We know if we had colder weather, cooler weather, that would actually be beneficial to us, not only in South Texas area and the southern area, but also in areas like Tennessee and if we start working our way up here to Indiana and things of that nature. This way, colder weather and cooler weather would actually be our best friend. But right now, we're where it's at in South Texas and New Mexico area, it's pretty much be on surveillance, be ready, and be reactive.
What is your concern about demand for beef?
You know, right now, if we were to replay the last couple of times we've been on, or I've been on here with you, it's always been kind of a question about, are we reaching a limit? Are we reaching a limit in terms of consumer demand? How high can we go before we have some repeal of demand? And I think over the last couple of weeks, we have seen the choice select spread go negative in favor of select. At times, be zero or have a modest premium to the choice side. And so for me, that's a first signal of some type of demand changing or being altered. And I think part of that reason was due to, if we think about the average American consumer, and they put aside or if they budget money every week for groceries, some of that money was getting taken away because of uh, the rising costs that were being seen at the gas pump. And so now over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that price come down such that in some places it's less than 3.80 a gallon for the first time in a while. And so we look at the rest of the world from a geopolitical standpoint. It looks like we're headed towards steady to lower gas prices for the average American consumer here in the short run and into the future. And so from that perspective, that angst that I had about, well, could we be losing demand because the price of gas has gotten so high that it cuts into that consumer's dollar and that willingness to spend at the grocery store. Some of that is going to be subsided a little bit now because of the decreasing prices at the gas station. So I think that's a benefit and a helpful thing to the industry. So it kind of alleviates some of that. Other things that I'm watching though are interest rates. Seeing if we're going to see a decrease in interest rates here in the next couple of weeks, maybe in the next couple of months, because that also allows that dollar to go a little bit further. But the other, from just a pure fundamental standpoint, we know that price of beef is still continuing to rise. Everything held constant, and if nothing was to eat at that consumer dollar for the average American, I don't think we've reached that limit yet. But given the reaction from the pump or from the prices increasing at the gas pump, given the reaction to how it impacted the dollar or impacted the choice select spread, and also given the fact that we know that we're tightening up on supplies and we're starting to reach those dog days of summer. I think that if we're going to reach that limit, it'll be sometime soon, and if not, it's going to be a matter of what does that look like. With the New World Screwworm outbreak, it kind of takes our little world of the market and shakes it up like a snow globe, and we're kind of still waiting to see where pieces fall, seeing what responses or where cases are going to be found and how long into the year before we start seeing some repeal back of the fly or some type of stabilization and it spreading. And so right now there's just, so many unknowns when it comes to the supply of the cattle side. But right now on the demand, I think we're holding steady right now, even though we've had some turbulence over the last couple of months.
Flip of the tortilla about this situation in the cattle sector.
Yeah.
Charlie, let's start with our conversation about the New World worm in South Texas. What is your concern about supply and demand equitation from the beef demand to consumers?
Yeah, I think, the immediate reaction is that we know now that if we think about just a location of animals, and we'll call that a supply. If we think of that area where the fly was, case one and two were, and then as it spread a little bit, and now we know after a week, there's some states that are now not allowing any cattle from Texas to flow into their state, and Canada and New Mexico have made their stances on not allowing animals that originate from Texas to their country. If we just think about the state of Texas and their supply and the supply of animals that they have, and now we're losing, if you think about they're losing demand with that supply, that could have some market implications. Now, Texas is so big that some of that might not be too much cause of concern, or if animals are coming from like the far northeast side of Texas, where it's not so much like Tyler, Texas, and kind of more in those that area, they might not be having or might not be seeing too much of a disturbance in the markets. But if you're in South Texas and we're used to hitting your daily or your weekly livestock auction or your local sale barn, there might be some implications right now by way of no supply, no demand, and market, kind of just going zilch for a little bit because of this newness and this unknownness. And I say newness and unknownness just because, yeah, we had screwworm a long time ago.
I talked about the feed demand from the corn markets. Yes, the corn acreage is going to be low for June acreage report on the corn estimate from the Department of Agriculture because of low supply of nitrogen due to the war in Iran. But what are you thinking? That could we get back to the corn markets with fundamentals trends from the cattle markets?
Yeah, so if we look at like stocks reports and we look at supply reports and we look at estimated cattle and feed reports, one of the things that we do know is placements were up. So we do know that there's going to be some demand there for for feed at the feeding level. And so if we sit there and we isolate, if you're on the cattle side, relatively speaking, price of corn has been cheap for quite a bit. Even if it goes up a couple of 10 cents, 10 cents here, 20 cents there, it's still relatively within reason from a feeding perspective, from a cheap perspective. Um, but I think if we think about on the row crop side of things and the profitability and where price levels were a couple of weeks ago versus where they are now, we've seen some slip and some decreasing in pricing, even though, as you mentioned, we had a reduced number of acres. That still doesn't offset, from an expectation level. We also have to remember that we're a world player when it comes to crops. Just like cattle, but with soybeans and corn, we are a big player within the world market. But that also means that we are subject to other world players and or world market players like Brazil and South America. And so when we're sitting here saying, yeah, we've had a reduction, other countries have had, ample supply, which decreases the prices that we see here domestically. And then if we think about the tightening of supply of cattle here, that decreases the demand for feed from a grain perspective. And so, if we think about that, I think that's some of the fundamentals why we see prices sitting at where they are today. Now, if we were to see some negotiation from a trade perspective,
Of course, especially with the New World Screw Worm. How do you describe your position on this cattle markets for this year?
how do I describe my position? I, for my way of thinking, I really don't have a position in terms of good, bad, or indifferent. I just, see, what's happening in the market and see how everything responds. As it sits right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're such in this early snow globe shaking. Let's see what happens to the market type setting. We're less than 10 days from the first case, and it's one of those deals where we don't even have some of the weekly market reports that we normally get. And so it's very hard to pin down what's happened. One thing I can say though is we do know that with a reduction in demand by way of certain states saying no, we're not taking Texas cattle, or Canada and Mexico saying we're not taking Texas cattle, and then what happens to those animals? It's interesting to see what's going to happen, but because that's essentially a supply shakeup, and to seeing what would happen into the future is going to be something interesting to watch. I think in the 2 to 3 weeks from now, we'd actually have a handle on as to what's happening, what can happen, what does it mean for the beef industry. I think it's a little too early right now to kind of pin down what's exactly going to happen. But the one thing we do know is the futures has responded, pushing prices higher. We do know that we've lost some trading partners for cattle that are coming out of Texas right now. And if we think about it, the whole grand scheme of things, Texas is a large state that has a lot of cattle, and if they can't move them, I could see that having some shakeup in throughout the beef supply chain.
What is your final thoughts about the New World Screw Worm in South Texas?
It wasn't, if we talk to folks that were in South Texas, it wasn't a matter of if, but just a matter of when. New World Schoolroom would get there and having a plan ready to go, ready to be enacted, having certain, medications and fly things and fly treatments and stuff of that nature. What would they do? They had it ready in place. I think, the implications of it is, from what we've seen is, the ones that have it, case 1 and 2, if you find them and handle it appropriately and just good stewardship and good animal husbandry. It looks like it can effectively be handled. The question is going to become, like I've always said, I think it's not going to be the livestock that are handled more often. And if you're not looking after animals, if you have not increased your level of putting your eyes on your animals, I would highly recommend that. Number one. Number two, there if it can spread in various other ways, I think if we think about stray dogs, stray cats, wildlife, we really don't have any control over that. So the biggest thing is control what you can control. Monitor if you see something, say something. Monitor, report it. Follow the protocols and try to help everyone else out. Just because if we're trying to help your neighbor or someone else in the cattle side of things that's around you in your community, trying to be on the lookout and do the right thing. It helps everyone, not only yourself, but the rest of the people around you.
Thanks, Charlie. This is the market's. Thanks, Charlie. I am enjoying the talk you on today.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
This is the Markets Club podcast for this week. I am Cesar Delgado. You have a great weekend.